The bottomlands of southern Arkansas harbor something strange and terrifying. A man-like hair-covered creature that stalks these long-forgotten lands. A being whose presence has been acknowledged by locals for years. Although the Fouke monster grew to prominence in the 1970s, its rise to infamy began decades earlier.
And I was, of course, working in a school. You can imagine how difficult it is to have a normal school day when somebody just up the road has spotted something that they couldn't explain. So many teachers would find appropriate ways to capitalize on that since it was a high interest level subject. And they created units of study to take advantage of that.
Today, the Boggy Creek Monster has gained a kind of local celebrity around Miller County. Celebrated at the local tourism draw, the Monster Mart, and frequently the subject of television shows, movies, and books, the creature is Fouke, Arkansas's most famous citizen. While this all kicked off in the 1970s with the release of independent horror film The Legend of Boggy Creek, sightings of the creature began decades before.
40 years ago, if you saw something, you kept it to yourself. If you couldn't figure out what it was, you couldn't explain it to nobody. You got an outside opinion of what somebody else thought it was. If you couldn't come up with a viable answer, you just didn't go spout it out. You didn't go out and make up stories. That's the way it was. You know, back then, your handshake and your reputation was everything. Nowadays, people make up stories and everybody laughs about it. Back then, you made up stories, they ran you out of town.
Well, you know, in law enforcement, you have to take evidence, you have to pile it, so you can't say, you know, let's forget about it. We had to have an answer. People wanted an answer. So we went forward with it. You know, we didn't cut corners on anything. We took it serious and we responded to every call. We investigated every call.
The ones that were in the woods knew something was out there and they pretty much didn't say anything about it. You know, they got up and told their story, and that's the way it was. Half the people didn't have to work out in the woods to make a living and the other half did. And the ones that had to work out in the woods and make the living, they're the ones that actually had events happen to them. You know, plowing a field, cutting trees down, fishing, hunting.
Local native legends talked of hairy creatures lurking in the swamps, and folk tales of its existence were passed down from generation to generation. Like the plentiful deer, waterfowl, fish, and game that inhabit the area, the Fouke monster isn't so much a local legend as it is just another denizen of the swamps.
My great Uncle James saw it in 1955. They were trying to keep it silent, you know, that he had saw something. They never did tell anybody, but my mother overheard them talking. Back then, kids weren't allowed to be around where, you know, grown-ups were talking, you weren't allowed to be in the room. So she was eavesdropping, like kids do. You know, what do they talk about? I want to know. And Uncle James was trying to say that he had saw something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. So him and my grandpa were analyzing it, and they ruled out a bear, they ruled out a big cat, they ruled out everything. And they couldn't come up with a good answer other than a big hairy man in the woods.
We had incidents where a man lost a hog, big hog. Something went into the pig pen, took a hog, carried it out, didn't break down the fence, didn't do anything. Carried it down 40, 50 yards of woods and found it down there dead. Found a horse dead, something that broke his neck. So there's lots of incidents that didn't get reported that I can, recall.
Many local residents believe that while publicly recorded sightings of the Boggy Creek Monster have reached critical mass today, accounts of encounters have been around as long as the area has had human inhabitants. With reports coming in almost daily, the belief is that sightings may have occurred even more frequently in decades past, when the best way to feed one's family was still through time spent outdoors. Despite the abundance of past sightings, they went undiscussed due to the ridicule witnesses often faced. Over the years, any number of ridiculous alternatives to the existence of the Boggy Creek Monster were proposed, from escaped circus animals to misidentified black bear. Often, the explanations for what witnesses may have experienced were more absurd than the actual existence of 8 men living in the bottomlands.
One of my cousins had moved down, he'd bought him a place, he didn't have a whole lot of money, he'd finally got the money to buy a place to live. And he worked on it real hard, he cut all the brush back, cleaned the little old pond that was out on it, and got it livable. And the man didn't have anything but this place. And one day he showed back up at my uncle's house and refused to go back home. My uncle says, well, you have a place now, go back to your own place. He said, I'll never go back there again. And to this day, he's never been back on that property. But he told my uncle, because he come back and told me, that he had saw the Fouke monster on that place. So when you don't have anything and you walk off and leave it, something's happened to you.
While its portrayal in pop culture has turned the Fouke monster into little more than a horror movie antagonist, the reality of encounters is something else entirely. Often, the creature was simply glimpsed beyond the undergrowth of the swamps, making its escape from the prying eyes of humanity. Occasionally, it was seen crossing roadways, seemingly to traverse from one section of forest to another, always attempting to escape civilization as quickly as possible. Whatever the creature is, the bulk of encounters are simple brushes with a curious, lonesome, antisocial animal, rather than a terrifying slasher movie stalker.
It was mid to late 40s when this happened. There was a man, so he was sitting on the back porch reading the paper. He got tired and tilted his hat down, went to sleep. Well, his wife had been hanging out the wash earlier that day, and she come out of the yard up onto the back porch, and he was going to reach and open the screen for her so she could get in the house because he knew she had an armload full of wash. And when he looked up, Fouke monster was on the porch with him. So he just kind of looked back down, so when he looked back up, it had cleared the porch and just stepped over a 3-wire barbed wire fence.
So it was not something that we thought was track callers, but like I said, we had people from Ohio, a family came in one time, or saw an officer on the road, stopped and said, hey, said, we're coming up through here and this big monster just like to run into the car. Yeah, Ohio, they knew nothing about the Fouke monster. So these are people that, of course we had a few crackpots out there, that give some wild stories, but the majority of all the stories that we had come in was from good, solid people.